Hi team, good afternoon. So today we are going to get into the integration course, wherein we are going to understand what are the frameworks available as part of the Guidewire development for integration course. So majorly we'll be having four different kinds of frameworks. One is the batch process, SOAP API, REST API, and messaging integration. We are going to see about each and every topic on a high level. What is the purpose of the specific integration frameworks and when do we use these integration frameworks? Because each and every framework is being used in a particular situation, like for particular solution designing. So we are going to learn in which scenario, which framework we need to use in the real-time example. And also we'll see one example for each of the pattern that we have as part of the integration course, so that we'll understand in which purposes which integration framework needs to be used. So framework is nothing but it's just a process. Usually it is already predefined process, which we are going to make use of it in a real time for the solutioning of the data that we are handling in the application. Okay. Having said that, so Guidewire integration consists of four modules. So majorly you'll have two teams in the project. So configuration team is different from integration team, but integration developers need configuration talent or skill set so that they work on the data model or any kind of changes needed. So a basic example, let's take an example that you're entering an email address on the user interface while creating a contact. So for that, as soon as the user provides the email address, we want to extract that email address, send it to the external application. That application is going to validate the email address is correct or not. Is it a scam email address or is it an inactive email address or is it like what is the status of the email address? So we cannot process the data internally in the Guidewire application in validating the email address because our application is not capable enough of determining if the email address is correct or not. So for that, we have some third-party applications which determines whether the email address is correct or accurate or if the storage is full or anything as such basic details. So during that case, from the user interface, you should be having an understanding of PCF to trigger the integration and send the data to the external application using one of the frameworks available here. So that is the reason for any integration developers in the Guidewire technology, it is mandate that you have a basic understanding of the configuration course as well. You don't need the full course of configuration, but you need the basic understanding like data model and majorly data model and PCFs is the fundamentals that you should be knowing when you're working with integration course or integration related topic. So having said that, let's go one by one. What are the topics we have in the integration course and each with one example. So the first one is batch process. So let's see with an example, why do we need a batch process? In which cases we use it in a real time, in which scenario we are going to make use of the batch process. Okay. Now let's go to a blank board. Okay. Now let's say you have a PolicyCenter application. This is your PC application. Okay. Now, or let's say our CC application, PC or CC or Claim Center, any application. Integration is common across all the applications. The skill set that you're gaining as part of integration is common across all the applications. If you get knowledge of batch process, it is the same way that we are implementing in all the other three applications, Claim Center, Billing Center, and Contact Manager. If you're learning REST API, SOAP API, messaging, any concept that you learn in the integration is common across all the applications present in the Guidewire tools. Okay. Now let's say we have a policy center or claim center application, and let's assume we have a bank application. Let's assume this is bank application. Now, every day, the bank or your policy center application, let's say, or your claim center application, once you met with an accident, your claim center application is going to pay some checks in the sense like the normal check payments that you get for as part of the accident, you get the reimbursement from the insurance company. So the claim center application will generate check every day. There might be multiple accidents for many of the insured, and they keep creating the check. So do you think that the check will be sent immediately? Immediately once the check is created, do you think the check will go to the bank application and it will be processed immediately? No, the answer is no. We are not going to process that spontaneously. What we are going to do is we have a check entity in the claim center application. So check entity will store all the records that we are creating. Okay, check one, check two, check three, check four, and everything. Now, what we can do is every day after 6 o'clock, let's say our business is going to end at 6 p.m. Okay. And after 6 p.m., let's assume at 7 o'clock, we want to extract all the checks that are created for today. So how do we extract all the checks created for today? By making use of the queries. Query dot make of check and then compare. Create time is today's date. Select all the checks. So you can extract all the checks present in the specific check entity and then create a text file. Okay. So in the text file, the first line data will contain claim number, check number, insured name, amount. Second check. In the second line in the file, it will have claim number two, check number two, insured name, and also the amount. So likewise, you can keep creating the text file. So to process multiple records at a time, we make use of the batch process. Okay. Individual records we are not going to process. When you have bulk number of records to be processed at a time, we make use of the batch process. So by making use of the batch process, we are going to create a batch process and then extract all the data based on the business criteria and then send this entire data text file. Let's assume this is a text file. This text file, we are going to send it to bank application. So let's say we are extracting the data at 7 p.m. after the business ended at 6 p.m. By within a minutes or fraction of seconds only, the data will be sent to bank application. This text file will be sent to bank application. What bank application will configure from their side is they will configure, okay, I'm getting the file at 7 o'clock or by 7:05, they are going to get to the bank application. Bank application will write some code internal logic, pick the file at 7:30. Okay. It will pick the file at 7:30 and the checks will be processed overnight to the customers. That is the reason whenever you met with an accident, once the payment are being processed, they will say 2 to 3 business days to be processed all this data in the backend application. The best example for batch process is whenever you make a NEFT transfer in the Indian banking system itself, NEFT transfers are transferred to the receiver bank only after 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes, there is a batch process that is getting executed at the bank application, which takes all the NEFT transfers done by the customer and then process the payment to the receiver's bank account. That is the reason if you go to Google and search for any banking application for the NEFT transfer via your internet banking, it will show for NEFT transfers, it is 30-minute batch every time. Only every time. So this batch process, what bank applications will do is they will keep every 30 minutes in the Indian banking system. The NEFT transfers will run batch process every 30 minutes. It will pick all the NEFT transactions that are held for that 30 minutes, process them at a time. Again, it takes one more time. If you're not making use of the batch process, right, what happens is every time you need to trigger the bank application. You get one transaction, you need to trigger bank application. You get another transaction, you need to trigger one more time. In this process, you're triggering only one time to the bank application, right? So when you have multiple number of records, we are going to make use of the batch process. That is the first framework that we have as part of the integration layer for Guidewire. Okay, any doubts?
No, bro.
Okay, now this batch process can be ran via multiple ways. One is user interface, where user can run it directly from the server tools. Alt Shift T, you'll have a screen for batch process. Okay, you have a batch process. Here, if you see a run and stop button, this is known as UI runnable. So we are allowing the users to run it from the user interface. This is one type of batch process. This is one just small configuration change that you need to make in the backend application to make it up these options. And you also have schedulable batch process. In the Guideware application, you have an XML file called schedulerconfig.xml. SCHE schedulerconfig.xml file. Once you create the batch process, you can configure the cron schedule needed. So this indicates every 30 minutes it is going to execute 0 hours every 30 minutes, every day at 12:30. There is a specific format to define this also. Even this timing parameters, how to schedule, like what is the values that we need to provide, this can be achieved via again AI tools. Like you can search in Google. There is a website for cron scheduling, how to configure these values also. We can make use of that to configure it. That is schedulable. So you can schedule, you can tell the application every 30 minutes we need to run it automatically. You don't need to even run it from the server tools manually. This is just an option to run it by yourself, but if you schedule it, you have an option next scheduled run. So in the next scheduled run, it is going to execute tomorrow, 13th April 2026 at 2 a.m. It is going to execute. And this batch process is going to get executed 12th April. It is already executed, and next is the schedulable. This at 3 o'clock, it is going to execute in next 14 minutes. It is going to get executed automatically. Okay. Likewise, and we also have API runnable. That means you can trigger the batch process not only from user interface, not only via schedulable, you can also trigger the batch process via the code logic. Like you are writing the code logic in the Gosu classes, right? Even there also you can trigger the batch process. So overall, your batch process is going to process multiple records at a time. Okay. Usually the use case is like night batches, like most of the batch process will get executed during the night time because we do not want to impact the performance of the application by running the batch process because you'll be running with multiple lakhs of records in the batch process. Okay. Let's move to the next framework of the integration. So the basic functionality of SOAP API and REST API both are same, but there is a simple fundamental change between these two. Let's consider two applications. Let's say you have application one and you have application two. What does this mean, application one and application two? Let's assume this is your policy center application. Let's assume this is your credit score application. Usually you need credit score, right, while creating a insurance policy. So this is your credit score application. Just ignore the spelling. I'm writing it with my mouse. So this is your credit score application. This is your policy center application. Once you create a contact in your policy center application, we want to immediately trigger the credit score application. So while triggering, we want to send some payload. Payload is nothing but the data that we are sending to the external application. You can call other than Policy Center if you're connecting with any other application, we can call it as a third-party vendor or external application or third-party application, any name. All names are same. Okay. We usually call it as third-party application or third-party vendor application. Okay. So immediately you create a contact in the payload. That means in the data that we are transferring over the internet, we need to send the basic details of the contact. Let's say first name, last name, date of birth, and all these details. We need to send it as part of request payload. Payload is nothing but data. So once you send this data, this credit score application is going to take the data, use this data to query their database and extract the credit score and then send it back to the policy center immediately. All this happens within fraction of seconds. It will send the response payload to us. In the response, they will send whatever details we needed. Like they will send you what is the time that they extracted the credit score and what is the actual credit score and some basic other details required as part of the credit score reporting. Like you will get some documents, right? Credit score. So those kind of information it will be sending as part of the response. Now, by understanding before the batch process on this API, our API is nothing but application program interface, which is majorly used to transfer the data between the applications. So you might be thinking, why do we need to connect our applications with external applications? Simple example. You buy some products from Amazon, but you will be redirected to payment gateway while making a payments. Now, is Amazon handling the entire banking system? No, because Amazon's core business is to provide a platform to sell the product, but its core business is not to run the entire financial ecosystem. That means Amazon is going to integrate with third-party vendors who provide the platform for payment mode. So it integrates, Amazon will integrate their application with payment gateways to process the payments as part of product buying. The same way, even Policy Center application is an independent application which handles only the life cycle of the policy, or Claim Center processes the life cycles of the claims. But it cannot self-independently process the credit score because credit score is part of your external government application. So you need the data and you have the dependency of the data across the application, right? So for sake of that, whenever needed, we get the data from external application. One such example is credit score while creating a policy. So immediately you create a contact, you send the payload to external application, you get the response. Immediately by the time you navigate to the next screen, we would have got the data in the backend application, saved the data into some specific entity. That is the reason we need the configuration talent as well while working on the integration course, integration frameworks. Because integration developers will make the connectivity, they get the response. After getting the response, where do they stay? They can't, after getting the data, where do they store the data? They can't just print the data into their loggers, right? So they have to store in the application. So for storing the data, they need bundles because you have to create a new object at the database level, and you also need to have an understanding of queries also, bundles, and also you need to have the concept of entities because you need to create a new entity and you need to make use of bundle for creating the new object, and you need to make use of the queries also to extract the data from database, because sometimes you may be triggering this integration twice and you need to update the same record at the database level. You need to ensure that deduplicacy on all these exception handlings and these things. I'm not going in detail in the technical concept, but on a high level, what is API? API is nothing but transferring of the data between the applications. And this is known as point-to-point integration. That means immediately you create a contact, you want immediately to send the data, get the response immediately. This is known as point-to-point integration or synchronous integration because it is synchronously sending and synchronously getting the response. Remember this. Okay? In every APIs, you will have two portions of it. One is publishing an API and one is consuming an API. That means in our example, this credit score application is publishing the data. It is telling whoever wants the credit score, I'm publishing some data from my application. If you want the data, you send me the request, I'll give you the data. That means this is publishing the data and PolicyCenter is consuming the data. In certain cases, you need to publish the data. We'll come to that example. You have PolicyCenter application and you have Policy Bazaar. You give basic details like contact details to Policy Bazaar. It will get you the premium values across multiple insurance companies. What it does is it is going to trigger the PolicyCenter application immediately. It is going to get the response. Now, who is publishing the data? PolicyCenter, because Policy Bazaar is sending the contact details and immediately it is going to do the internal quoting and it will say this much is the premium that we are expecting for creating a policy in this insurance company. Now we are publishing the data. Policy Bazaar is consuming the data. So it can be both publishing or consuming. So whenever you're working on any APIs, you will be working on REST API. You will be working on consuming or publishing an API. Okay. And internally again, the SOAP API, most of the times you'll be handling with XML payload. What is XML payload and everything is you're going to learn it in the main course. Okay. So application to transfer the data, we make use of the SOAP API, and mostly SOAP API deals with XML payloads and some WSDL files and WSDL file. This is known as WSDL files and it is format in the XML format. The same concept applies even for REST API, which is the third integration pattern that we have. In the REST API, the main difference is that the SOAP API deals with XML payload and the REST API deals with JSON payload. And in your REST API, you have multiple methods like get, post, put, and delete method. And moreover, the payload that we are seeing here is a very lightweight payload because it follows the structure of key value pair. Policy is a key and the center object is a value, and policy number is another key. This value is a value. This is key and this is value. This is key and this is value. If you see the same thing here, you need a opening tag, you need the closing tag, you need multiple special characters to create the XML payload. That is the reason it is heavyweight payload and this is less weight payload for transferring the data across the internet. Okay, and the entire examples remains the same. It is just that the payload and the authentication models that we make use of it for REST API is robust. So usually whenever you log into new applications in the Chrome, it will ask you to sign in with Chrome. How are we able to sign in with Chrome? It is via single sign-on. And this is completely like authentication models. Authentication models is a whole different concept again. You can have n number of authentication models that are available. You might be having auth authentication, basic authentication, token-based authentication, and multiple other authentication modes that we'll be using. It depends on how external application has built. Now, let's say your external application is following OAuth authentication model. So we need to authenticate this application using OAuth authentication itself. But if your external application is uh, making use of the basic authentication, you can make use of the basic authentication. And it comes completely as part of authentication models in the while building or consuming a REST API or SOAP API. Any questions on the APIs? These are point-to-point integrations, both SOAP API and REST API. Any questions?
Yeah, bro. So in our Guideware application, which API that we are going to use, REST API or SOAP API, bro? Because we are handle only on XML files only, right? So we don't use, I think, JSON.
Yeah, usually Guidewire has started very old back. Now, on the on-premises version, we have till version 10. After version 10, we have cloud applications on Guideware. So we have SOAP integrations. Out of the box, there are many integrations that we have which connects between the applications like Policy Center to Claim Center. Because for creating a claim, you need a Policy Center to Claim Center integration also. Those out of the box integrations are built on SOAP API, which are provided out of the box. But Guideware is recommending us to build the new APIs as part of REST API. In the new integrations, whenever we are building, Guidewire is strictly mentioning don't use SOAP API, make use of the REST API itself. There are many more advantages with REST API. So majorly we'll be working on REST APIs as part of the cloud integration.
Okay, okay.
Okay. And finally, we have messaging integration, which is complex and also very effective model, which is the event-based model. And this is not a synchronous integration. This is an asynchronous integration model. The reason why it is asynchronous integration model is, I'll tell with an example. Now, you have policy center application. You have your UPI application where your UPI payments are handled, and you have your mobile. Okay, you're doing phone pay. Okay, now immediately once you make a payment, okay, let's say there is a failure. Sometimes it comes as pending, pending, pending. So during that cases, what happens is asynchronous model is not directly triggered to external application. What it does is once you make a payment, it will have a intermediary table. It is linked with your source application itself. So once you create payment, the transaction will be created in your mobile and the transaction will be stored into the message table. Okay. And then from this message table, the data will be processed into the external application. If your external application is down, let's say the application is currently server down. Sometimes you'll get server downs, right? Few of the applications will not work. Like YouTube, Instagram also, sometimes they are down, right? So likewise, if the application itself is down, you will not be able to make the payment. Now, if you immediately say it as error, that means it's a very bad user interface. Again, the user has to keep on retrying it. So let's say, how will the user know that the payment, I mean, he has to retry it within 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever the situation is. So what we are going to make is, we are going to make use of asynchronous mechanism where the transaction will be stored into the message table and your messaging integration will handle the retry mechanism. If the application is down, after certain time, again, it is going to retry by itself. Again, it is going to retry by itself till it reaches the maximum number of limit that we configure in the application. It is going to retry by itself or after certain period of interval. After the maximum number of intervals have been reached, it is going to show it as failed. That is the reason even in your phone pay, automatically it will not get errored out, but after some time, after multiple retries in the backend, it is going to get failed. Okay, this is known as asynchronous mechanism and event-based model also. Messaging integration is a event-based model. That means, let's say, as soon as you create a transaction, it triggers the integration and send the payload. As soon as you update the transaction, it triggers the event and then sends the payload to the external application. As soon as you delete a record or whatever it is, if you do certain action, that is a triggering point to trigger the integration messaging integration, which stores the payload into message table and then process the data into external application. Okay, that is your asynchronous mechanism. Even if you see here, you have business event. That means as soon as you create a policy, right, automatically there would be an event triggered in the policy center application to send the policy data to billing center application via messaging integration. Okay, the data will go to message table. From the message table, it is going to get processed in the external application. But in your point-to-point integration, directly the message, as soon as you trigger the integration, it triggers directly the external application and external application will send back the data. But in here, the retry mechanism will happen at the message table level, like application framework will handle it out. Okay, it shows here non-blocking communication. So now you guys might be thinking, bro, we can retry it manually. What is their big challenge? Why do we need such a big framework for processing this data? I'll tell a best example. So now you're creating a contact. Let's say as soon as you create a contact, like in our previous example, I was telling like point-to-point integration. Let's say you're triggering as part of SOAP API, you're triggering this integration to validate the email address from this application. Let's assume this is email validation vendor who validates the email address. Okay. So you create a contact, you provide the email address. Since it is point-to-point integration, immediately it will throw an error. Okay. If it throws error, the user will not be able to create the contact. So just because of you're not validating the email address, you cannot stop your business in creating a account, right? Let's assume you have an insurance company. Your backend team has developed the entire ecosystem of the integration, and just because of the email address is not validated from the customer standpoint, like application is down and it is an issue from your side, and you're not allowing the user to create the account itself. That means, let's say you got 1,000 customers in your insurance office, and because of the email integration has been down, you cannot stop the entire business of 1,000 policies being created, right? So that's a very bad integration. You are losing your business. So during that cases, what we can do is we make use of the messaging integration. You trigger the event, the data and the payload will be saved into the message table. From here, it is going to process it, retry it maximum number of times. But here you will not get the error. It will still allow the user to create the account or contact. That is the benefit of your event-based model. It will not stop the user. Even though if the application is down, it is going to retry it after some times using the message table. And the payload also will be created here. Since the payload is stored in the middle layer, that means your messaging table, you don't have to trigger the integration again. Let's say in the point-to-point integration, you create a contact, the payload is generated instantly, and the payload is transferred here. It errored out. Again, if you want to trigger the integration, again you need to provide the email address and then trigger like submit button, and then it is going to trigger one more time. So every time you trigger the integration, the payload is getting generated in a real time in the backend application, right? So because of that, every time you want to create the payload. But in the event-based or messaging integration, once you create the contact, the data is automatically or the payload is automatically created in the application, okay, in the messaging payload, in the messaging table, and from here it is going to process. Now, if the application is active now, okay, application is working actively now, you don't have to trigger again contact creation because the payload is already saved in the message table. That is your asynchronous mechanism. Any doubt between point-to-point integrations, which is synchronous, and this asynchronous mechanism?
bro.
No, right? So majorly asynchronous mechanism is used when you want to allow the application to progress, but you can get the response payload at later point as well. Or you just want to submit the data. Now let's say you create a policy. Now let's say you have PC application and you have BC application. Okay, you created a policy. As soon as you create a policy, you want to send the data to billing center application. So if you make use of point-to-point integration for PC and BC after creating the policy, if the billing center is down, let's say there is a deployment in the billing center application, immediately it will throw error. It will stop the entire policy center application also. The main agenda of PC-BC integration is once you create the data in PC, you want the same data in the billing center application also, the policy created. So what policy center doesn't care if the data is being created in the billing center or not. It just sends the data. Whether billing center is down or billing center is up and running, it doesn't care because PolicyCenter's job is done, creating the payload, sending the payload to Billing Center application. It doesn't care whether the data has been successfully submitted or not. But the messaging integration whether will handle sending the data to the Billing Center application successfully. That is the reason you have a screen for administration, monitoring, messaging queues. Okay. Here you have something called billing system. Here you'll see a retriable error failed. In flight means in progress. The messages are still processing into application 2. That means billing center. Unsent, batched, retry, all these things. Okay. This is your messaging integration where we are going to monitor the message queues and the messages that are processed. Okay. Since SOAP API and REST API are like point-to-point integration, they're directly sent in the backend application also. You can't even see the data. You can just need to print the payload in the loggers itself. Okay. And one final thing is, before closing, I'll come to this comparison at lastly. Uh, there is, along with the batch process, there is something called work queues. Okay. If you go to server tools here, there is batch process, there is work queue. Let's see the difference within shortly, like within 2 minutes, we'll see the difference between the batch process and a work queue. The major difference between the batch process and a work queue is, let's say you have application one and application two. Let's say there are 1,000 records to be processed in the batch process to external application. So what batch process will do is, or let's say from external application, you're getting 1,000 records into PolicyCenter. It can be vice versa also. External application will send 1,000 records. You have to take all those records into PolicyCenter application. So when you get 1,000 records as part of batch process, right? Batch process will take one record and then process individual record. Okay. But the same thing, if you make use of the work queue, if you have 1,000 records, work queue is going to take multiple records at a time, depending upon the worker nodes available. Assume they are workers. If you go to work queue, like batch process, we have work queue information. You see here, executors running. These are the number of workers available for each work queue. You can increment the number of workers needed for each work queue. So as long as you increment the number of worker nodes, let's say you have 10 workers for the work queue. So instead of processing one record, it will process 10 records at a time because you have 10 workers. Okay. And if the each record is taking 1 second to process, the batch process will take 1,000 seconds. But since you're processing 10 records at a time with 10 workers, this entire time would reduce to 100 seconds. Okay. Along with that, in the work queue, you'll have retry mechanism also. Let's say these are data coming from external application. You're processing using the bundles and committing the data into your database. While processing it, you got some exception in the PolicyCenter application. The batch process will not retry the record that got failed, but the work queue is going to retry the record that is getting failed. It is a internal functionality. Work queue records will be retried automatically by the configurations that we provide inside the application. But work queues is very rare concept that we are going to develop it from the scratch. Even an integration developer will not work on it frequently. But we need to understand for an interview purpose level, what is the difference between a work queue and a batch process. Work queue will process record parallelly, but batch process will process the record sequentially. Depending upon the worker node, the number of records will be processed very quick in the work queue. Okay, that's the difference between your work queue and the batch process. And coming back to comparison, your batch process will process records, multiple records. Either it can take the data into a text file or a CSV file. CSV means like your Excel sheet, comma separated file, and XML file, any data. You can process it in the batch process, multiple record. And SOAP API makes use of the XML payload, which is a synchronous model. And REST API also, we can make use of the JSON payload, and it is also a synchronous model itself. And your messaging integration will make use of the asynchronous model, and data transfer is being done again via making use of XML or JSON. Okay. And your batch process is a scheduled mechanism. or on demand. On demand is user is manually running the specific batch process from the user interface. So these are the four frameworks that we have in the integration mechanism for Guideware. Making use of these four frameworks, we are going to entirely develop the integration. So these are the framework. Using this framework at a certain moment of time, like based on the solution designing that we needed, we are going to make use of these integration patterns. Each one have its own steps and its own uh, files to configure and make changes. Any questions?
No, bro. So if we understand this four concept means we can start our
Yes,
integration like.
yes. First, we need to understand the frameworks related to these four applications, not, the frameworks. Making use of this, you can connect to credit core application, you can connect to your email address verification integration, or you can connect to banking applications, or you can connect with any other applications. Your payload might be changing, your XML payload will change, but the entire connectivity of with the external application will remain the same. When you're creating a batch process, you create a class and you extend with batch process base class, like completely technical again. This is like introduction thing. So usually once we learn the framework, making use of this framework, we need to write the logical changes needed using the Java programming language. Java is nothing but Gosu. Gosu is nothing but Java. It's just the syntactical changes. That's all.
Yeah, okay, bro.
All right. I think we are on the top of the time. If we don't have any more questions, we are good to wind up the call. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, bro.